We have been reading Sri Aurobindo's description of the powers of the cosmic horse. Having described the digestive process, the absorption of material and the spreading of it through the rivers, the regeneration of the life energies through the lungs and the liver, and so on, Sri Aurobindo now moves the attention from this apparently superficial imagery to something more profound, where the powers are described: thunder, lightning, and rain. We read last time Sri Aurobindo's description of these three terms and the deeper sense that they carry. Having dwelt on them already, we will review them now with some further insights which will emerge in our meditation. You will remember the lines in the description of the cosmic horse. When he stretches himself, then it lightens. When he shakes his frame, then it thunders. When he urines, then it rains. Speech, verily, is the sound of him. So we have lightning, thunder, rain, and then vak, speech, in that order. So Sri Aurobindo describes this stretching himself, the word used in Sanskrit, vijrumbhate. Sri Aurobindo says, vijrumbhate extends himself by intensity, makes the most of his physical bulk and force. The second term is vidhunute, and then there is thunder, throws himself out by energy, converts his whole body into a motion and force. And Sri Aurobindo describes how the electricity, vidyutas, the material symbol, medium and basis of all activities of knowledge. And he quotes here in Sanskrit, which last time we only read, Sarvani Vijnana Vijrumbhitani. And he leaves it at that. When Sri Aurobindo quotes, it is for two purposes: to link what is currently being described with an essential idea in the traditional teaching. But he does this only when the idea is extremely important. Or he does it as a suggestion to draw on all that is associated with that idea in the traditional exploration and link it to what is being discussed. In this case, we look at both of these. Here, in exploring this phrase, Sarvani Vijnana Vijrumbhitani, we find two references of Sri Aurobindo to this in his other writings. The text itself comes from the Vishnu Purana. So it's quite clear that Sri Aurobindo not only had read the Vedas and the Upanishads, of course the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, Kalidasa in their originals, but also texts such as the Puranas. And when it came to commenting on something like this in the Brihadaranyaka, he could draw upon those references as necessary. So in the Vishnu Purana, there is this phrase, and in Sri Aurobindo's translation of this phrase, which appears in his glossary, he puts it like this: all things are self-deployings of the divine knowledge. Now literally the Sanskrit terms would be sarvani, all, vijnana, the supramental knowledge or the divine knowledge, supermind, vijrumbhitani, throwing himself out by energy, extending himself, stretching. So Sri Aurobindo translates this phrase as all things are self-deployings of the divine knowledge. So all things, sarvani, of the divine knowledge, that is the vijnana here, And Vijrimbhitani is this self-deploying, this stretching out. And immediately for our study, this term, Vijrumbhitani, gives a new dimension. So far we saw it as the stretching, extension, and the extension in intensity, and the lightening as a result, the revelation of knowledge. But here it is self-deploying, a conscious self-extension into multiplicity, releasing what is already within it potentially, but launching out in a self-expansion. And now suddenly the whole thing acquires a new meaning and a new dimension. We find these two ideas elaborated. The first one I take from a text which is still unpublished in the conventional volumes. It is part of the Archives and Research Journal, Volume 8, Number 1 of April 1984, in an article titled Saraswati and the Great Ocean. And here Sri Aurobindo is discussing the word mahas. The word means great, embracing, full, comprehensive. And in that discussion, there is this reference. He says, at first while exploring this term mahas, Mahat seems here to be an objective principle, but this need not trouble us. For in the whole old Hindu system, all that is objective had something subjective corresponding to it and constituting its real nature. So here is the preparation for the main discussion. All objective experience, reality, form, force, has a subjective corresponding something which is its real nature. So in other words, anything that is expressed objectively is an expression of something else which is real at a more subjective level. And the objective is a secondary, reflective, phenomenal reality. And this is declared, he says. We find it explicitly declared in the Vishnu Purana that all things here are manifestations of Vijnana, pure ideal knowledge. Sarvani Vijnana Vijrimbhitani. Ideal knowledge vibrating out into intensity of various phenomenal existences, each with its subjective reason for existence and objective case and form of existence. So this is the text which we are going to look at for this deep, profound insight that comes in this phrase. All things are manifestations of Vijnana, pure ideal knowledge. This is the supermind. All things are manifestations of the supermind, but this ideal knowledge vibrating out into intensity of various phenomenal existences. So the concentration of the Vijnana, of the supermind, is now releasing itself into the multiplicity, but the movement of that release is a vibrating out into intensity of various phenomenal existences. And you see how Sri Aurobindo had translated this phrase, when he stretches himself, then it lightens. But the Vijrumbhate, he said, extends himself by intensity, makes the most of his physical bulk and force. And at the same time, there is this other idea, vidhunute, throws out by energy, converts his whole body into motion and force. These two words are of great impetuosity and vehemence, and taken in conjunction with the images, extremely significant. The yogin will at once recognize the reference to the electrical manifestations which accompany often the increase of concentration. And so he says, the first image is therefore an image of knowledge expressing itself in matter. The second is an image of power expressing itself in matter. And so all of this, now you find suddenly bound together in this single description. Both the lightning and the thunder are as if captured in this. Ideal knowledge vibrating out into intensity of various phenomenal existences. And there's this vibration as it moves into the manifestation. And the vibration is extremely important because shortly thereafter it will be connected with the speech. Speech is the burden of definite thought. Speech with its burden of definite thought is the neighing of this mighty horse of sacrifice. So this is the vibration. You find these three coming together in a single description, and then as it moves into various phenomenal existences, each with its subjective reason for existence and objective case and form of existence. So there is a form in the objective experience, but the form is only the result of something else which is subjective and which is the reason for that existence. In other words, everything first is held in its central reason, in its consciousness, and therefore subjective because it is experienced by consciousness in itself. And then from there it moves to take on a case and a form, an external covering, a sheathing, in which it is experienced in the objective world as a thing. Now with this background, we will look at the second reference that Sri Aurobindo makes to this same phrase. And this is in the famous text, The Problem of Rebirth. And I am reading from page 336 of the new volume series, volume 13, Essays in Philosophy and Yoga. Here Sri Aurobindo is describing the four truths of, or four pillars of the complete theory of karma. And in the middle of that comes this very important discussion. So just for the completeness, we will briefly look at the four truths. The first, he says, that there is a interconnection of all things which happen, the fixed relation, steady succession of the links, etc. And the only problem with this is, he says, if you stop there, then you find yourself bound in a rigid chain of determination, and you can have no real control or a chance of mastery. At this point, he says, I should be a slave and puppet of karma and could never dream of being a sovereign of myself and my existence. But here, there comes in the second step of the theory of karma. And this is the part where we will find this phrase. And it is the idea which creates all relations. So first step is seeing all these interconnected relations. The second step is seeing that there is an idea which creates the relations. That is, in the divine creative consciousness, there is a conception of how things are to be related to each other. And therefore those relations form. But at the level of idea, there is something which moves into those relations. So Sri Aurobindo says, all is the expression and expansion of the idea, capital I. Sarvani Vijnana Vijrimbhitani. Here is that quotation. And this is as if summarizing this statement, all is the expression and expansion of the idea. Idea with a capital I is the real idea, it is the supramental creative power. And so all, the Sarvani, Vijnana, the supramental, Vijrimbhitani is expression and expansion. So all is the expression and expansion of the idea. The result of this is, then I can, by the will, the energy of the idea in me, develop the form of what I am and arrive at the harmony of some greater idea than is expressed in my present mold and balance. But still, he says, if idea is a thing in itself without any base, but its own spontaneous power, no one originating the idea, then I would be bound in the form of the universal idea. And so there is a third step in the theory of karma, and that is that I am a soul developing and persisting in the paths of the universal energy. That in myself is the seed of all my creation. So So the soul is not merely a result of the idea, but it has its own independent power which it can assert in the play. And finally, there is this last supreme liberating step, that both the idea and its karma may have their origin in the free spirit, and by arriving at myself, by experience and self-finding, I can exalt my state beyond all bondage of karma to spiritual freedom. These are the four pillars of the complete theory of karma. These are also the four truths of the dealings of self with nature. So the whole discussion is quite profound, but the main thing here is the soul can find its identity in that greater freedom from which the idea itself emerges, and from the idea the energy and the relationships and manifestations unfold, express and expand. Sarvani Vijnana Vijrumbhitani. So this is from the problem of rebirth. And now you see the definition of this, the translation of this phrase: all things are self-deployings of the divine knowledge. It is the divine knowledge which becomes all things as it spreads out. Now suddenly this spreading out, when he stretches himself, then it lightens, has a very different meaning. In other words, the whole movement of manifestation by which the idea and the knowledge becomes now the multiplicity of form, takes on appearances of shells and media and forms. This is that extending himself by intensity, vijrumbhate. Now, one more dimension comes when you look at this word vijrumbhate in its more colloquial sense. Of course, stretching is the general sense, but more colloquially when we are in conversation, vijrumbhate is also used to describe yawning. This stretching movement by which the mouth opens and something is as if moved out. So when the cosmic horse yawns, it is as if stretching out itself to move into manifestation. And there is again a suggestion because of the link with the mouth and the power of Agni. And we will touch upon this now through another text which is in the secret of the Veda. So we'll look at, there are many references all over in the Life Divine or in the Veda, secret of the Veda, to the lightning and the thunder. Not so much the thunder, but much more the lightning as illuminations of knowledge in the illumined mind or in the intuitive mind and so on. But here we will look at certain passages in the Veda where the lightning and the thunder and the water of the rain are linked together. So first I take a text from chapter 18, The Human Fathers. In the new edition, it is page 189. I just read what he has written here. The Angirasas with the divine word, this is Vak, which will be the fourth thing which will come in with the rain. The Angirasas with the divine word, the cry of heaven, which is the voice of Swar, the Bhurbhuva Swa, the voice of Swar, the luminous heaven, and of its lightnings thundering out from the word, the divine waters, or 7 rivers that are set free to their flowings by that heavenly lightning of Indra, the master of Swar. And with the outflowings of the divine waters, the outpressing of the immortalizing Soma. These constitute the form, Pesha, of the Adhvara Yajna. And its general characteristic is forward movement, the advance of all to the divine goal, as emphasized by the 3 verbs of motion, Nakshanta, Vedu, Navanta, and the emphatic pra, forward, which opens and sets the key to each clause. Now we are not going to go into the Vedic text which he is referring to. But you see two very interesting things here. First of all, there is the combination of thunder, lightning, water flowing, not rain but rivers, and Vak, the creative word. And all four are put in the context of a general forward movement. They advance towards the divine goal. And this is exactly what we have been seeing in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, when the whole theme of the first verse is this forward movement flowing into manifestation, where dawn is the head of the horse sacrificial, and everything is in this forward movement of manifestation. And in this forward movement of manifestation, these four are now bound together. And what's the relationship here? From the heavens, the Swar, the luminous heaven, is the voice of the Swar, the cry of heaven, the divine word. And with that word, that is the creative word, it's lightnings thundering out from the word. And with that, the divine waters or seven rivers that are set free to their flowings by that heavenly lightning of Indra, the master of Swar. So from the heavenly region, from the master of Swar, when there is the lightning and thunder which flows down, the rivers are set free to be released. Till then they are not free. And we see how this is so beautifully reflected in the very physical processes which we discussed last time. Until the lightning takes place, there is no thunder and there is no rain which begins. The clouds can wait, but it is the lightning within the cloud which releases the rain and starts that process. And from the outflowing waters, from the divine waters, the outpressing of the immortalizing Soma, these constitute the form. And this is the general forward movement, the advance of all to the divine goal. So this is one interesting text. And there is a second text where also we find these things brought together. And this is part of the commentary in his selected hymns on Soma, Lord of Delight and Immortality, in the new volume, page 354. So I first read this portion. Soma is the Lord of the wine of delight and the wine of immortality. Like Agni, he is found in the plants, the growths of earth, and in the waters. The Soma wine used in the external sacrifice is the symbol of this wine of delight. It is pressed out by the pressing stone, Adri, Gravan, which has a close symbolic connection with the thunderbolt. Remember, even physically, when you strike stones together, you get the spark. But Adri is deeply connected with the thunderbolt in the Veda. So he is elaborating on thunderbolt. Let me read again. It is pressed out by the pressing stone Adri Gravan, which has a close symbolic connection with the thunderbolt, the formed electric force of Indra, also called Adri. The Vedic hymns speak of the luminous thunders of this stone as they speak of the light and sound of Indra's weapon. Once pressed out as the delight of existence, Soma has to be purified through a strainer, Pavitra. And through the strainer, he streams in his purity into the wine bowl, Chamu, in which he is brought to the sacrifice, or he is kept in jars, Kalasha, for Indra's drinking. Or sometimes, the symbol of the bowl or the jar is neglected, and Soma is simply described as flowing in a river of delight to the seat of the gods, to the home of immortality. That these things are symbols is very clear in most of the hymns of the 9th mandala, which are all devoted to the god Soma. Here, for instance, the physical system of the human being is imaged as the jar of the Soma wine and the strainer through which it is purified. and said to be spread out in the seat of heaven, Divaspade. So we don't need to read further, because the rest is an elaboration of this, how it is trained and purified in the human instrument, in the human consciousness. And one could read that for elaboration. Right now we have enough to see the connections. First of all, the pressing stone which releases the soma is Adri. But also the thunderbolt of Indra is Adri. And the thunderbolt, Sri Aurobindo explains as the formed electric force of Indra. And when Indra, who is the lord of the spiritual mind, when he releases his thunderbolt, there is the light and the sound. So, the Vedic hymns speak of the luminous thunders of this stone as they speak of the light and sound of Indra's weapon. And then there is the flow of the waters, the rivers of delight flowing to the seat of the gods, or the soma which is taken through the strainer, purified and then poured into the receiving vessel, which is the human jar, the human vehicle, or generally the jar would be any receptive pot. The universe itself could be seen as that. With this background now, we reread the text and you will suddenly find something very new that strikes. When he stretches himself, then it lightens. When he shakes his frame, then it thunders. When he urines, then it rains. Speech, verily, is the sound of him. And before we take the literal sense of the mighty horse, the urine, we just see it first as a flow of the rain. And looking at the Vedic image, the associations are of the descending streams of consciousness. But also in what we just read, the purifying flow of the delight of existence flowing down to be purified in the receiving vessel. And the vessel here we can see cosmically or we can see individually. And we'll dwell on both these ideas. First, individually, when there is this action in the higher consciousness, in ourselves, in our own higher mentalities, above the intellect, in the domain of the illumined mind where the lightnings are frequent, in the domain of the intuitive mind where it is by the revelations of lightnings that we see, and as we ascend up in the intuitive mind, there is a series of lightnings clustered together until there is this constant illumination of lightning. From there, from that lightning, from the thunder, from the power of the Spirit, comes the release of the flow of that nectar of immortality as it descends into the yogi. So from that higher flash of illumination and the power that comes with it is also the immortalizing flow that fills the human vessel, which now must be received, held, purified, and offered to the gods. And the descending flow, therefore, is nourishing and it is immortalizing. Similarly, seen on a cosmic scale, we have the same sense. When at a cosmic level, there is a descending movement from the higher station of the divine creative power to the lower station of the phenomenon objectivized in the multiplicity of the world. From its subjective, all creative power and knowledge to this objectivized, formed multiplicity of the universe, there is a downpour of his knowledge and power. And so when you see this image of a lightning and the thunder and the stretching out, and we view this in the definition, all things are self-deployings of the divine knowledge, we see at a cosmic level the divine knowledge power deploying itself to become the multiplicity. And this is the lightning, the thunder, and the descending movement of the rain which creates this form, nourishing all things, therefore. And what is it that presides over this whole movement of manifestation? The creative word, Vak, which is the voice of the cosmic horse. So suddenly we see this whole thing in a much different light now. We see here a downpour from the higher ranges of consciousness to the lower of the power, creative power of consciousness, and as it descends, it does what rain does. It brings life, it nourishes. In a recent article which I saw barely a few months ago, there was a discovery that if the earth did not have lightning in its early years, there could never have been the combinations which created the life form. The amino acids and such structures which were formed, they found were formed in the process of lightning in the upper atmosphere. They descended with the rain and became the basis for life forms below. So the conclusion of the researchers was that if there was not lightning extensively in the early stages, there could not have formed the life on earth. Equally, they said, if there is not lightning now, there could not be the combinations of nitrates, nitrogen combining with oxygen and hydrogen in various structures, which then descend with the rain to fertilize the soil. And nitrates are the only fertilizer that soil has to trigger this whole process of growth of plant. Sri Aurobindo, in his commentary, says of this, the third, the image of the rain suggests that it is from the mere waste matter of his body that this great power is able to fertilize the world and produce sustenance for the myriad nations of his creatures. And here now we dwell on this strange association of urine. Sri Aurobindo simply says, it is mere waste matter of his body. And it is this where we catch the meaning of why the Upanishad uses the term urine. It does not have the same association that the human mind currently has in the modern context. It is rather waste matter, that is, things which are not needed, which are thrown out. And that alone has the power to rejuvenate and give life and immortalize. So it does not separate from the deeper Vedic imagery that we saw of the rains and the rivers. It just highlights this fact that what descends is only as if waste matter, not even necessary for the Lord for his greater creation. It is simply what is thrown out, and even what is thrown out is so rejuvenating. And here we come to another idea which is common in the Vedic terminology. They describe the planes of the universe in a vertical ascension, but referring to the material domain, the densest, lowest grade, as waste matter. Uchishta, what is thrown out, what is left behind when the best is taken away. They also use this term, Sri Aurobindo uses this term in Savitri, where he describes the material world and material experience as the bitter draught which remains at the bottom of the barrel of wine. When wine the grape juice is kept to be fermented to become wine, the densest portion settles at the bottom, and it is the bitter, dark, thick liquid which generally has to be thrown out. And as a symbol, you see how it matches perfectly with the Vedic image, that it is the densest, coarsest, most bitter part of the cosmic experience which is here in matter. And it is described as waste, as that which is left behind, as that which is thrown out. And that is the material world, that is the density of matter, and its inconscience, inability to participate in the delight which permeates all of the rest of the cosmos. And so with this, suddenly we are able to see how the sense of throwing out as waste matter comes in very easily. And so what the mighty horse throws away as its waste is now the nourishing flow of rain for the material manifestation. So in all three, the knowledge, the power, and the nourishing flow, the lightning, the thunder, and the rain, we find the idea of something descending from above into manifestation. And the whole thing is now suffused with the creative power of the word. And so the fourth description comes. Speech verily is the voice of him. This is how Sri Aurobindo translates. The Sanskrit phrase is Vageva asya vak. Vak, speech or the creative power. Eva, alone. Asya, of this horse. Vak, speech. So, speech verily is the voice of him. And Sri Aurobindo explains, speech with its burden of definite thought is the neighing of this mighty horse of sacrifice. By that, this great power in matter expresses materially the uprush of his thought and yearning and emotion. The visible sparks of the secret universal fire that is in him, Guha Hitam. So again, this idea of drawing into matter what is otherwise held in the domain of thought, yearning, and emotion. But the means of doing it is this creative word, Vak. This we have dwelt on at various times. Sri Aurobindo has spoken extensively of this creative power. We find this throughout, across all the traditions of the world, in the secret power of the mantra, that the mantra has the capacity to manifest what is held in the mind. The word itself, mantra, by dwelling in mind, it is released. So the idea is that it is by this creative power that things come into being, but the nature of that creative power is sound, speech, or in other words, generally, vibration. In approaching this question purely from the physics, we will find a close correspondence with the spiritual truth also. In the physics of it, we see it this way, that all the physical universe eventually is found to be an underlying ocean of energy. But the energy in movement and the movement of energy itself is in waves. And that's why all the equations of quantum mechanics are wave equations. Even what is seen as a particle is described by a wave equation. So the underlying reality is vibrations in the energy. The vibrations resonating, building complex structures, building interference patterns, repeating themselves and interacting with themselves to create phenomenal, persistent forms in their appearance. When two vibrations entangle themselves, you have the experience of force. When the entanglements repeat themselves, you have the experience of form, which is stable. But eventually, all resolves itself into vibration in the ocean of energy. And this is the reality of the crude physics. When we look at it, not in the subatomic reality, but in a more macroscopic human experience, we find something similar. We find that vibration has a creative power and even a power to destroy, When, for example, a certain frequency of vibration hits glass shatters. And people demonstrate this because, according to the size of the glass, there is a particular pitch of its resonance. If a human being releases a tone, sings, in other words, at that exact pitch, the glass vibrates so much that it cannot contain its shape and it breaks. But the truth behind it is that that pitch turned that glass into a intense resonating form. It could not contain the intensity, therefore it shattered. But if it could contain the intensity, it would have become fluid. It would have as if melted, changed its form. And if we do not take glass but something else, which is more elastic, then with the sound we are able to shape it and change its form, create new form. In the extreme, there is a whole series of experiments in which fine dust, powder, is put on a vibrating surface. Different kinds of sound are now released on the surface. And as the surface vibrates, the powder moves around and enters different kinds of images. And of course, the images themselves are a creation of the vibration, and therefore with each kind of sound that we release, the image changes. There are books full of such descriptions. You will find a particular book called Cymatics, which is a lot of images, pictures. What is interesting to see is, according to the kind of sound that are given, they find images which resemble things in the world. For example, they find images which look like the human cell or any living cell. A cellular structure appears in the vibration created by the sound. Images which appear like leaves, like flowers, sometimes even complex landscapes which appear. And all of these are being produced purely by the vibrating sound. As the sound changes, the image changes. When the sound stops, the image relapses and extinguishes itself. In other words, the form is given by the vibration and is upheld by the vibration, is an expression of the pure vibration. You withdraw the vibration and the form vanishes. And here's the interesting part. One of the most fascinating claims which comes from this research, that when they used the chant of Om, they found a pattern forming of circles and triangles, which is very similar to what is known as the Shri Yantra. In other words, then the Shri Yantra is a symbol of the whole cosmos. In other words, the Om vibration, which has its own variation, Om, it has its own movement, its own variation in resonance, created images, symbols which we associate with yantras in the traditional knowledge. And you can see how this truth, which is so physical, so concretely visual and measurable, imaged in matter, would be expressive of a deeper spiritual principle. Now, in matter, where form is much more rigid, you can see how sound changes form. But in the vital worlds, where form is more fluid and energy is the underlying reality, or in the mental world where thought is the underlying reality, this principle becomes even more intensely real. So real, in fact, that at the very moment of articulating that vibration in thought, not even in speech, vibrating in thought, the form appears, a thought form appears and acquires its own reality. And the nature of thought vibration is no different from the speech vibration, except it is more subtle and therefore more complete, more essential, more creatively powerful. It is the experience we have in dream state when we become conscious in the dream that we are dreaming. We suddenly notice that whatever we think becomes real. You choose to be in a location, you are in the location. You choose to do something, see something, create something, change something, shape something, and it does it. The very act of thinking is the creative vibration which becomes the reality at once. Because in the mental world, thought is the greater reality. In the vital world, that translates now into an energy. The thought form now dynamizes the imprint of the flow of the energy. In the material world, the thought form dynamized the energy which took on patterns and rhythms of objectivized form. And you see a continuity across these three worlds. But what is behind it is that intention of creative vibration, pure vak. In the biblical tradition, in the Gospel of St. John, I believe, is this phrase right at the beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the idea is the Word with the capital W, the creative word, Vak. It is the divine himself in his creative movement. And that is the beginning of all things. And so you see Sri Aurobindo says, by Vak, this great power in matter expresses materially the uprush of his thoughts and yearning and emotion across the worlds all the way down to matter, finally expressing in matter. The visible sparks of the secret universal fire that is in him, Guha Hitam. Guha Hitam, Guha is the cave. Secret in the cave of the heart hidden is this creative fire whose visible sparks flow out into matter in this way. And this is the creative word, the voice of the horse sacrificial, the cosmic horse. So the next paragraph takes up the second verse, which we will see next time. But right now, in this paragraph, we have missed one thing very important. In Sri Aurobindo's commentary, he skips over this, but elaborates on it in the next paragraph, where he discusses the second verse. And that is this one phrase: the rising is his front, and the setting his hinder portion. We saw this just before he stretches himself, when he shakes his frame, and when he urines. Just before that is, the rising is his front, and the setting his hinder portion. And now we come back to this, which we had skipped so far, and suddenly the meaning is obvious. The rising is his front, which is this whole movement to move into creation. And what is behind is that which is leaving behind, which is subsiding. So, in the voice of the horse, in the creative forward movement, things emerge. And as the horse passes, they are no more a part of his body, they are no more of his interest. They subside back into the unmanifest from which they had emerged. Nothing is ever lost. This whole concept is elaborated in the next paragraph, so we will not go further into it. We will review it when we look at the paragraph. But the idea that the frontal half of the horse is this emergence into manifestation, and then as the purpose is fulfilled, it moves, gradually drifts and fades into the unmanifest again. But the reality of what was brought into manifest was always there in the unmanifest, and is brought out by this voice, the creative power, the speech of the horse. So with this we complete the first verse, and we can read the whole verse again and meditate on it. Om. Dawn is the head of the horse sacrificial. The sun is his eye. His breath is the wind. His wide open mouth is fire, the master might universal. Time is the self of the horse sacrificial. Heaven is his back, and the mid-world his belly. Earth is his footing. The regions are his flanks, and the lesser regions their ribs. The seasons his members, the months and half months are their joints. The days and nights are his standing place. The stars his bones, and the sky is the flesh of his body. The strands are the food in his belly. The rivers are his veins. His liver and his lungs are the mountains. Herbs and plants are his hairs. The rising is his front, and the setting his hinder portion. When he stretches himself, then it lightens. When he shakes his frame, then it thunders. When he urines, then it rains. Speech, verily, is the sound of him. Vag eva asya vak.